Well, hello, spooky people. Welcome back to That Spooky Life, and thank you for joining me on our weekly slide into the between. I'm Miranda, and I am happy that you are here. Thank you for joining me. It's episode 2. Yay! I've been working to try and better sound quality and make sure that there's content. I am going to be trying to post this weekly, and if something changes in that, y'all will obviously be the first to know. I believe I mentioned in the last episode that I do, in fact, have social media set up now. So you can follow me at ThatSpookyLifePodcast on Instagram and at ThatSpookyLife on Twitter. If you guys have any desire to see what silly stuff that I post, and I also post updates on the podcast there. I'm also posting updates on my personal development as a witch and as a podcaster. So fun times there. If you have any interest in following those shenanigans, I encourage you to seek me out. At the time that I am recording this, I have put out internet feelers to see if anybody would be interested in a Facebook group at some point. Obviously, there's not a huge following here, so that may just be future endeavors and thinking big sort of thing. But if that's something that you would be interested in having a Facebook group that we could discuss things about, I would have it be a private group that you could request access to. That way, if you guys wanted to share paranormal stories, but not necessarily have your friends and family and your mom or your grandma or your grandpa know that you're talking about ghosts with a bunch of strangers on the internet, I would be happy to do that. But you guys can let me know on Instagram or Twitter if that's something that you would want. And to be perfectly honest, I'm a lot more active on Instagram than I am on Twitter. It's there just in case, because I do check Twitter occasionally. I just don't use it as often as I use Instagram. Additionally, I've been having fun times journaling for the first time in forever. As I mentioned before, a friend of mine is a writer. We have known each other since we were knee-high to a grasshopper, as the saying goes. And she recommended that I start a blog to go along with all of this. And I'm happy to say that it has seemed to have some really good traction. You guys seem really interested in it, and I'm happy to share because it keeps me honest and journaling and making sure that I can look back and go, wow, look how out of my mind, crazy, amateur, didn't know what I was doing I was then and how far I've come. I feel like that perspective is very important for people in general, but also for somebody who is trying to better themselves through enlightenment and spirituality, etc. If you have interest in following that, it will be thatspookylife.blogspot.com. Actually, let me make sure I told you that correctly. Yes, thatspookylife, all one word, .blogspot, blogspot.com. And I post links to the episodes there. I post some pictures occasionally when I have them. You'll probably see some cross-posting from Instagram because I just enjoy doing photos and putting them on Instagram. And then I'm like, oh, I can use this elsewhere too. Neat. So I hope you've had a good week since the last time we spoke. I have been trying to incorporate more practice into my daily life, even if it's just drawing a tarot card a day or lighting a candle for a devotional or watching a video from somebody that I respect in the field of either paranormal or the witching world, as it were. One of my personal favorites is Michelle Belanger, who has the Inspiration House in Ohio. She's also done numerous things and is a prolific author, if I'm honest. And I've had the pleasure of doing a workshop with her. I met her at DragonCon on the paranormal track one year. I actually would like to try and make it to one of her classes either at the Inspiration House or one of the yearly gathers that she participates in Ohio. It's called House Caperu Gather. I hope I'm saying that right. It's either Caperu. Wow, it really didn't sound any different. It's Caperu or Caperu. I'm not sure. Either way, I'm a huge fan of her work, in addition to being inspired and helped by a lot of the things that she's written, like the Psychic Codex and the Psychic Vampire Codex and numerous other works. For those out there strictly interested in the paranormal aspect of this show, I recommend The Ghost Hunter's Survival Guide by Michelle Belanger. And for those who may be interested in helping develop some of your more innate or subtle abilities, such as psychic readings and energies and things like that, I recommend the Psychic Codex. She is not supporting this podcast. This is all just free advertising because I really very much am a fan of her work and have been helped by it I've had a couple of communications between myself and her agent, assistant, partner. Illyria is super sweet, and I've always enjoyed our communications. And she's the one who's, at this point, encouraged me to try and put in a face appearance, and it's just a matter of money and scheduling and job and all of that. All the real-life adulting things that I do when not recording this podcast that have sort of gotten in the way of that until now. I am hoping to try and make it next year, and I've had a couple of people express interest in potentially going with me to help split costs and hotel room and all of that. Yeah, hashtag check out Michelle Bellinger's stuff. I very much enjoy watching her instructional, conversational, entertainment videos on her YouTube channel and find her wisdom and insight to be greatly helpful in my day-to-day life. So if I'm at a place where I'm like, oh, okay, well, I've done a divination, I feel like I need to learn something more today. She's usually one of my go-to channels that I check out. So today's episode, I am excited to bring you one of my personal experiences from what is actually a hometown location that is rife with urban legend and supernatural activity. I'm going to give you what history I know about it. Lots of it is hard to pin down on the internet, and I have not really actually studied a lot of it in years. I had some long conversations many years ago with a member of the Rome Area History Museum, and they gave me some insight into certain things and filled in some blanks, but there's honestly not a lot to it, especially online. And because I got lucky and decided, I was like, oh, this is a subject I might touch on because I've had some personal experiences here. One of our listener submitted stories from a dear friend of mine is also about this place today. And as you can tell from the title of this episode, it is CCC Road, or Seven Bridges Road in Rome, Georgia. Hilariously enough, the story that I'm going to tell you today, I've actually submitted as a personal experience to one of my favorite podcasts called And That's Why We Drink. Check it out. Em and Christine are super cool and super funny, and I totally appreciate them. I'm going to go way more into depth on details than what I necessarily sent them, because in writing that to them, I actually realized that there were some subtle details after I'd already sent it that I missed just in my typing. But if you ever hear this story on Then That's Why We Drink, know that that's me. Yay! That's me, Miranda O. At the time that I'm recording this, they have not covered it as a listener story, and I'm not sure it entirely fits in with some of the themes that they're going with recently, so it may never be read, or watch this episode get posted and it be in the next episode of And That's Why We Drink. Like, that would be my luck, obviously. But if you hear it there, know that that's me. So I'm just going to dive right in because I'm terrible at transitions, and I don't have any more updates. I think that's it. So I'm just going to go ahead and start telling you about CCC Road. I lived most of my life in Rome, Georgia. And while I have plenty of stories about my original house that I lived in Kingston in the woods, Rome is so haunted, like so terribly haunted in so many areas and so many places in so many ways. If you're familiar with Rome or from Rome, you are super familiar with probably stories of CCC Road. You probably even know where it is. And you may have even driven or walked down it from childhood to today. It's one of those places in a small town that everybody knows about. Some people don't know where it is. Some people have only heard the legends and the stories and other people's stories. And, you know, they're like, I don't even know if it exists. Well, let me assure you that it does. I've not met as many people, well, at least in my generation, that called it Seven Bridges Road, though I've been led to believe that that was the original name of it. The street sign absolutely just says CCC Road. And I know this because my mother lived like a block away from it for a number of years, and so did my best friend. So it was amusing because when my mother moved into that house, I was driving down to meet her and I missed the turn because I wasn't sure where she lived. And I turned around and was trying to I was like, oh, I'm going to tell my mom this funny story how I drove past her house. What street am I on so I can tell her, oh my God, this is CCC Road. Because the first block of it, or half block of it, it's really not a very long way at all, is actually paved. But the other 3 miles of it down to the T intersection that most people call the Bend is a dirt road and logging trail. So I turned around on CCC Road and realized that I had been trying to find it without a car the majority of my young teenage life, and then accidentally stumbled on it by the time I had a car. So I was amused by that personally. CCC Road is actually technically a part of the Berry College campus. It is part of the land that they own. And I'm going to give you a few little facts about Berry College. Berry College campus claims the largest contiguous campus in the world at 27,000 acres. Founded in 1902 by Martha Berry, the campus proper is known for structures such as the Ford Building that looks like a huge gray castle basically right as you come into the campus. It's beautiful. The House of Dreams and the Old Mill that were all on what is called the Old Campus, and fun little tidbit trivia about the Old Mill at Berry College. It was actually featured in the CW show Constantine as John Constantine's base of operations. So the mill that you see that he walks into, they actually filmed all of that on Berry campus in Rome, which I think is super cool because Hellblazer was always one of my favorite comics as a kid, and that show was a very, very good representation of it. And the first time he pulls up to his, quote, secret hideout, I was like, wait, I've been there. I have pictures of that. I have a picture of that place. I have a picture of me standing in front of that place. What is happening right now? And then I realized it was all filmed in Atlanta, and that was really cool too. So there's your trivia tidbit for the day. So we were founded in 1902 by Martha Berry. Honestly, I will probably talk to a bunch of folks that I know and do an episode or 7. It's probably not going to be 7, but an episode or 2 on Berry College at some point. There are so many supernatural, crazy stories from cryptids and ghosts and things like that I could do probably a 1 to 3 part series on it. But we're just going to focus on CCC Road today, just the one thing. And while it's just a logging trail in the woods with no streetlights or anything like that, it is one of the most strangely active locations steeped in crazy urban legend, and is one of the local hotspots for like ghost hunting and sort of like a rite of passage for teenagers in Rome to an extent, and young adults. I mean, I'm sure there's been adults that have gone down there as well. So we're going to dive right into the urban legends because I love them. Also called Seven Bridges Road by some, as my notes tell me. The name comes from 7 bridges that are supposedly located on the road. Imagine that. But the biggest urban legend that most people hear is that going down the road away from like the suburban area that it's in, the main strip, there are 7 bridges, and if you turn immediately around and come back, there are only 6. When I was searching to see what might be on the internet about this, in addition to my own experience, I found Yahoo Answers has a question about 7 Bridges Road that comes up, and under the most popular answer is an entry where somebody apparently walked down and back and said, there were no bridges, it's a lie. That's my words, my paraphrasing, not theirs. They were much more long-winded about it, but there are bridges. I have confirmed personally that there are, especially, like, there's one right at the start when you first leave the paved area to the actual dirt road logging trail part of it. I mean, there's a bridge right there, so to say that there are no bridges is a fallacy, but they're just not obvious. They're more like runoff drains at this point, if they ever were bridges, but I know there's some there because there's little streams and stuff that go underneath the road on either side, and, well, I have not gone and crawled in any of them because that would be foolish. CCC Road is a dirt road. It needs drainage, things like that, so that trucks can get down it. It's very overgrown on the sides because it's not really used for anything but logging. But I can assure you that there are some bridges. Now, the problem with that is the fact that I have been down and back it only ever on foot. I have some friends who, when they were younger and it wasn't blocked off, they apparently have driven down it. And they were like, oh yeah, there's 7 going down and 6 coming back. But I've only ever walked down it. And usually late in the afternoon towards twilight, towards dark, etc. My problem is I have never been able to count all 7 bridges going down because it's like 3.5 miles. So by the time you get down, you forget how many you already counted or you missed one. And I've never actually counted 7 going one way at all. So by the time I got down there, I was like, well, I didn't see 7. There's no point in counting coming back. I know there's at least 4 that I can think of. But I've never actually managed to see what I thought were all 7, if that makes sense. So that's the first urban legend that I ever heard, probably the first that most anybody's ever heard about CCC Road. But there are more, and the next largest that I have discovered is about the large cat that supposedly roams the woods. I have heard everything from people saying it's a spirit of the land, potentially once worshipped by native indigenous people, to no, they actually believe that there's an oversized cat. And I have heard rumors and tall tale that there were some students out at Berry campus that were hiking and came across a large paw print larger than a dinner plate and were able to create a cast from it. And so there was supposedly this cast of an oversized paw print from the dirt of CCC Road. Now, this is the area where mountain lions, cougars, etc. were in the woods of northwest Georgia. They live there. To think otherwise is foolish. There are no doubt mountain lions and things like that in the area. But the urban legend states that it is larger than even like a female lion. It looks like a mountain lion. It looks like a cougar. It has the short hair, doesn't have a mane or anything like that. People have seen it as black. People have seen it as tan of like an actual mountain lion. However, it is said to be larger than a fully grown adult lion or tiger, and that the paw prints, like when I say dinner plate, I mean like the nice china that your mom gets out at Christmas, large dinner plate style, not just like a paper Dixie plate or something like that. So there are some stories that say it is a spirit that protects the area and the trees and things like that. And there are some people who believe that it is an actual full-on living, breathing, flesh and blood cryptid. So that's cool because I have heard almost an even split on the matter. Most people who have heard the paw-cast story, like the students who found the large indentation of a paw, they believe that it's actually a full flesh and blood cryptid. Some people believe that it is a spirit and can also leave the paw prints. Some people disbelieve the paw prints and just believe that it's a spirit. And of course, some people don't believe in it at all. I personally have had an odd experience where I saw eye shine of an animal. I'm going to say an animal. And we thought, okay, sure, we're out here. There's deer. This makes sense. Cool. But as we moved and the shadows of the trees would move in front of it, we realized that there was more depth to it, that for those eyes to be as far away as the trees were making them appear, it would have to be very large. And we never really found an explanation for it. And we tried to stray from the path to go investigate. Obviously, they disappeared because if it was a large animal, they considered us to be larger predators, I guess. Though if it is a large cat, let's talk about who's actually at the top of the food chain in that relationship. The answer is the cat. But we tried to investigate. They disappeared. We could not find them again. But there were 4 or 5 of us that night, I think. And we all saw it. We all saw that it absolutely looked like animal eye shine. It was very sort of disorienting because of the depth and like perspective in the fading light. We didn't see any shape attached to it, but of course, literally everybody went, oh, it's the cat. Personally, I think it is a spirit. I think it is a spirit of the land who probably protects the area, and as long as you're not being disrespectful, isn't going to mess with you. But it'll watch you to make sure that you're not being disrespectful of the area. Potentially in an indigenous totem of some kind. But I've never seen a cat shape, but I've also never really felt malice from it. Just observation. Of course, you always feel like you're being watched on CCC roads, specifically from the woods, and it's not necessarily just by some protective spirit or giant cat cryptid. There's a lot of stuff down that road, and we're going to get to that. So, the rest of the urban legends include a satanic priest who masqueraded as a regular priest and sacrificed children, apparently in dark rituals in his off time. And then the witches that lived at the other end of the road from the church that would festoon the trees with deer entrails and stick men and things like that to keep people from coming onto their property. I have never found any evidence of a satanic priest or witches on that road in any form or fashion. Now, I've had a hard time finding dates on this. If you search, not a lot comes up. You just get a bunch of histories on what measles actually is when they started giving the vaccine, in addition to the more recent outbreaks in 2019 that were in the metro Atlanta area. I don't think any of them were in Rome. None of the links that I discovered said any of them were in Rome, but it's the new stuff and then just a history. So I can't find any history of this, but from what I understand, at the turn of the century, there was an epidemic of measles in the Rome area. And of course, this was not long after the Civil War was over, long before civil rights, all of that. And the pastor of the church that is in fact still in use down CCC Road, that I believe holds services once a month at this point, the pastor of that church at the time allowed children of all races and all colors to be buried in the graveyard because they were children. And I don't know how familiar you are with Georgia if you watch any media of any stripe, but racism is something that has been struggled with in the entirety of the South and also Georgia for a very long time. So the fact that there was a pastor doing good work and allowing children, regardless of what family they came from, to be buried in holy ground so that, as he believed, their souls would be protected and they would be returned to God, etc., I could very much see that people would not take too kindly to that, as it were. And I could not even fathom at the time what types of things were said about him, if he was shunned, what could have come of that. And I also know how stories and mythologies and languages works over the years, and dissent about his actions probably evolved into him being some sort of satanic worshiping priest sacrificing children down CCC Road, honestly. The fact that the urban legend has to do with a priest and or pastor and children, and there was history of a pastor and children, that leads me to believe that there was no actual satanic priest there, that it was just people who didn't agree with what he was doing loudly, and probably with much zealous bigotry, probably talked a lot of shit, and it evolved over the years into being something way worse than it ever actually was. It could take something that wasn't actually a problem and turn it into satanic worship. But that is pure conjecture, pure speculation, because I can't find any actual recorded information to back any of that up. These are literally just stories to me and stories that have been told to me over the years. As for the witches, I have never found any evidence of witches. I have never heard a story nor learned a secret that would damn or save my soul in that fashion. But there were hearsay of people who knew people that there were two spinster sisters that lived down the other end of the road around the bend. And it was also late 19th century, early 20th century. So heaven forbid they didn't have a husband, and they were spinsters living alone in a house out down this logging trail on the campus of that Martha Berry. Obviously, that makes them witches, right? Like, they couldn't just be strong, independent women who didn't need no man. They were obviously witches, and they obviously performed animal sacrifices and would curse anyone who stepped onto their property, and hung up, innards and things like that, and made little curse stick figures and would hang in the trees to keep people off their property, or they'd curse them if they went any further. Again, speculation. Two unmarried women living in a house in the boonies. People probably killed animals and festooned their trees to just make it look bad. And I don't know, maybe they were widowed, maybe they weren't sisters, maybe they were lovers, who knows? All of those things were totally socially unacceptable at the time. Therefore, the little small town rumor mill was going to grind out whatever gossip and juicy lies they could make people believe, I would assume. But that's speculation. So take that as you will. Those are, to my experience, the four biggest urban legends surrounding CCC Road. If you are from the Rome area, or are familiar with the Rome area, and you actually know other urban legends about CCC Road, I would be super interested to hear what you have heard, share what stories there were about it when you were there, or what you were told about it. Those are the four that I know, and those are the four that I heard repeated by multiple people multiple times in multiple different unrelated venues, as it were. But if there's more, I'd be happy to hear about it, because I love it. I love the urban legends. I don't believe most of them. I find them to be interesting, And I like trying to dive into the history of those type of things to try and figure out where they came from, even if I just end up with a bunch of conjecture and speculation at the end of it, because, well, that's how it happens. The story that I'm going to share with you today, I selected because it's the one thing that has happened to me on CCC Road that I genuinely have no explanation for. Like, there were a couple of things a couple of times that I was like, okay, maybe it's this. And there was maybe a reasonable explanation for these things. But this one, I've got nothing. Because every reasonable explanation I had at the time, I used to try and debunk what I was witnessing, and nothing came to fruition. Nothing. I'm just going to dive into it. I'm going to stop procrastinating. I'm just going to dive into it. 2 people were with me, and I've talked to one of them, and they're fine with me sharing this story. The other one I have lost contact with, so just in case, I'm going to change both of their names. One whom we will call Mandy, and one whom we will call Jay. So Mandy, Jay, and I decided that we were going to go get our exercise that day because we were trying to get in shape and we were going to go for a long walk. We decided, why not? Why don't we just go walk down CCC Road and back? That's 3.5 miles one way, 7 miles round trip. We were going to try and do between 6 and 9 anyway. Let's do it. Actually, Mandy was my friend that was the other person that lived down in that area at the time. So we met at her house and walked actually down to CCC Road because it was right close to where she lived. And we thought we had plenty of daylight. We thought we had a couple hours of daylight. We did not. We either misjudged or the strange spatial what's it of CCC Road that lots of people have experienced tripped us up. And literally nothing happened while it was light. It was just lovely, quiet, out in the woods, no car noise, no light pollution. It was just lovely. And then we get to the end of the road, which I have learned since is actually a T-junction and just one side of it is fairly overgrown. But at the time we called it the bend because it looked like it just curved around. And that was the farthest that any of the 3 of us had been at the time. And we realized that it got real dark real quick. It wasn't just the canopy, because over the road there obviously is no canopy because there's no trees in the road. And most of them are trimmed back pretty regularly from the road because, like I said, logging trucks go down there and you don't need branches and trees running into those big trucks as they are moving lumber and things like that. So we were standing in the clear with the open sky over us and it was getting real dark real quick. But Jay really wanted to continue on. And it was to the point that when you looked over the bend, there was a slight rise to the road and there was a canopy to the trees over there. And it was real dark. And Mandy and I were like, no, we're not going to do that. We should go back. And Jay was like, well, I just want to go a little ways. I just want to see what's around there. We were like, okay, listen, you have 15 minutes and then it's the pirate code. If you're not back in 15 minutes, fall behind, left behind. Good luck. So I know that kind of sounds shitty, but Jay was special. He loved poking the paranormal bear with a stick. He liked finding new weird things that he couldn't explain. And I had the problem that there were animals in the woods, and we had learned recently, this was one of the last times I actually ended up going to CCC Road, because for a long time I didn't realize that it was on Berry campus. We were technically trespassing, and I did not want to be caught trespassing after dark. So he started to go over the bend, and Mandy and I were like, all right, check your watch. Got 15 minutes, and then we out. While he's gone, we're standing there talking, chatting, catching up, talking about the experience thus far and how it was. I mean, we were walking for exercise, but at the end of the day, we were kind of paranormal investigating, like is what we were doing. Just call it what it is. And we were talking about how it was kind of a relief, but also kind of disappointing that we had not experienced anything this go. Because I had numerous times before, and Mandy had never been down there, and Jay had never been down that far. And so while he was off, we were discussing. And I looked down to my right, and just off the side of the road, I see what appear to be blue lights. And they were tiny little blue lights. They looked like Christmas lights. and they were spaced evenly apart, so that the first thing my mind thought of was the Christmas light webs that you throw over your bushes to decorate your house for Christmas, because they were that evenly spaced, and they were all bright blue. Honestly, they were one of my favorite colors of blue. And I was like, well, that's odd. As I watched them, they faded off. And then they faded on again. And then they faded off again. And so did they continue, all 36 lights that I immediately saw in unison. And I looked up, and there were little glimpses of other patches of these throughout the woods. And there would be a small patch that maybe only had 24 lights in it, then a larger patch that had to have close to 100 lights in it, and they were all blue. And while each patch sort of had its own timing within the individual groupings of lights, they would all turn on, like fade on in unison, and all fade off in unison. And I stood there for a second, making sure that my eyes just weren't doing weird things in the fading light. And I looked at Mandy and I was like, do you see this? And she was like, yeah. What the hell is that? And I was like, I don't know. Is it fireflies? And she looked at me like I had grown a second head and was clearly speaking crazy talk, which I did not find out until 10 years later why. So mark that, put a bookmark in that in your brain. We'll get back to that in a minute. So she looks at me like I've grown a second head. And I was like, okay, fair. I know it looks weird, but I'm trying to debunk. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. So there's a lot of poison ivy in the underbrush around CCC Road, because there's a lot of poison ivy in the underbrush in the entirety of Georgia, to my understanding and experience. So I look down and there's no poison ivy in this area. It just looks like sort of like weed, low to the ground flowers. Obviously they're low to the ground because it's off the road and there's a canopy of trees, etc. So I reach down and I'm sort of moving my hand through, like trying to disturb this. Because if this was fireflies and I run my hand through this, they're all just going to get up and fly away and be done with it, right? Nothing. Every time there was this weird spatial distortion that every time I thought I got near one of the blue lights, it just wouldn't be there. I was using the flashlight on my cell phone at this point to try and find bugs, to try and find anything. And anytime I would get near one of the blue lights, it just wouldn't be there. Or like, it was almost like my hand passed through it. Like there was nothing tangible to it that I could find. Until one of them, I ran my hand through, it turned green, flew up and was a firefly and flew away. And so I was like, oh, obviously this is some like weird chemical reaction and firefly mating season or something like that. And I tried harder. I doubled down. No, never found another one, could never get another one to move. Anytime I would like close in on the ground or close in on a leaf or something where I thought this light would be, it just suddenly wouldn't be anymore. And they all continued to turn on and fade off at the same pace in the same unison. So at this point, it's been like 25 minutes because Mandy and I got completely distracted trying to figure out what this was. And we weren't going to stray from the trail into the dark of the woods because now the stars were coming out. It was full on dark. We weren't going to investigate it much further than that. We tried to take a picture and no lights showed up on any picture. Granted, this was flip phones. And this was the day of flip phones, people. This is not HD 4K iPhone video. So who knows what would have happened if we'd had one of those cameras. But we tried to take pictures. Flash, no lights came out on the picture. We could see them with our eyes. We could not capture it on camera. So we're like, okay, it's been 25 minutes. Jay, we call for him and we hear him real far away. And like, it sounds like he has gone a ways, but he calls back and we're like, we're leaving. You should come see this. And then he's all of a sudden just like right back there. And when he showed up, his eyes looked a little weird. I know it's dilated because it was dark, so everybody's trying to see. But he was acting a little strange, to be honest. Speaking a little too slowly here and there. But I asked him, I was like, how far away were you? You sounded like you were in Kansas. He was like, no, I literally just went over the rise of the hill and I've been standing there listening and watching. I was like, well, have you heard any of our conversation? He's like, no. Did you guys talk? He had not heard a single thing, be it discussing what we had been catching up on during our day or the fairy lights or anything. He hadn't heard anything from us the entire time. And when I called to him and he responded, he sounded like he was way further away than over just a little bitty rise in a hill. It's not even a hill. It's like there was probably some dirt there at one point and then they drove over it. Like, that's it. So he sees the lights and he's like, what the? I'm like, I told him everything we did. I told him all the debunking we'd gone through, and he starts trying to do the same. His brave ass even went into the woods to the next patch to try and figure it out. Same difference. There, like, nothing we did would disturb them. They kept slowly on, slowly off, slowly on, slowly off. Could not get them to disturb. Never saw another firefly. So he looked back into the woods. He's like, there are so many more out here that you can't see for the trees on the road. He looked at me and said, okay, we're going to go. And I was like, that sounds like a good idea that I had 20 minutes ago. We start to head up and walk out. Now, nothing else happened that night. And what I'm going to say is it's not uncommon to feel like the entirety of CCC Road, something is watching you, which is probably things that have helped invigorate the big cat urban legend down there. But we really very pointedly felt like we were being watched the entire nervous, spooked out walk back that night. And that is the story of the blue lights on CCC Road from yours truly. As an addendum, 10 years later, I am telling the story as I basically just told it to you. Since then, I had talked to Jay about it a few times, and he was like, yeah, all those blue lights, I don't know. That was crazy. We couldn't get them to move. He's like, it was so crazy. I am willing to even say from what I witnessed myself that those were not bugs. I don't know what they were, but they were not bugs. I don't know what was happening. No, there's not a swamp around there. It wasn't swamp gas. It was really weird. It looked like electrical lights. We'd had that conversation a few times. So Mandy and I have birthdays that are very close together. Gemini sisters. We're at a birthday party. Seriously. I mean, it may not have been 10 years, but it was getting up there. It was 7 to 10 years later. A long time. And I'm telling this story to a friend of ours from out of town. And I pull Mandy over so that she can add in and all this stuff. And I get to the part where I'm like, and all these blue lights start turning on and off. And it looks like Christmas lights and all this. And Mandy stops me and she goes, blue? And I looked at her and I was like, yes. She's like, you saw blue? And I'm like, yes, what the hell did you see? She was like, well, what did Jay see? I was like, we talked about it. He saw blue lights. And I was like, what did you see? She's like, I saw rainbow multicolored lights, every patch. She was like, it was all different colors within patches and things like that. It wasn't like there's a red patch, there's a blue patch, there's a gold patch or whatever. She's like, no, it was like multi-hued Christmas lights in each patch. What? I don't even know what that means. Like, I don't even have any sort of speculation as to what it means other than the fact that I'm pretty sure if Fae touched is a thing, it is a thing that Mandy is. Let me tell you that. I know for a fact that Jay and I saw blue lights, and Mandy apparently saw rainbow multicolored lights, and I didn't find that out until nearly a decade later at a birthday party while I was retelling the story. So, personally, in discussions, I have sort of come to the belief and understanding that it was some type of fairy thing. And that's one of the few things that I cannot tell you when, where, why, and I can promise you, other than getting down on the ground and rolling around in it, which seemed like a real bad idea, we did everything we had available to us to try and debunk it and could not find a source or a reason. So, that's my spooky story for the day. So that brings us to our listener-submitted story for the day. And today, this one comes from Brent. And we're just going to dive right in. So, Brent writes, there's a road in our hometown that is the site of many an urban legend. Supposedly, when driving down it, there are 7 bridges going one way and only 6 coming back. There are also legends of an overly large cat that prowls the woods, larger than the area's mountain lions and cougars, more like a cat of Bigfoot proportions. Rumors of satanic church long ago, and an equally old story of witches who used to live down this road. Everyone in town who has been there for a while has heard one story or another about this place. I told you guys, literally everybody, well, I say that. That's only 2 of us, but considering these were written separately, I'm just saying. One evening, I and a few others decided to go see what we could see. Some of us had been down before, some of us had not. At the time we went, it was no longer possible to drive down the road as it had been blocked off, so we were all on foot. Down to the bend and back, should one make it that far, was just shy of 7 miles round trip on gravel, with no streetlights and woods on either side of the trail. With flashlights and phones charged, we started our walk at sunset with the intent to make it all the way to the bend in the road, uncertain of where it went after, as none of us had made it much farther at the time. It was tradition once full dark to go without flashlights after a point, if it wasn't too dark to see while walking. So about 2 miles into our initial trek, off to the left of the road in the full dark of the woods, we all stopped when a light shone through the trees. I don't recall who it was who to first call hushed attention to it, but we all stopped and looked. Clear as day, there was a doorway. It was back quite away from the road and was rectangular, and a nondescript whitish-yellow light, as an open door in the dark might look. The problem with this was for those of us who'd been down the road before, we knew well that in that particular location where we stood, there was literally nothing out in those woods. There was no building, structure, anything that had a door, let alone electricity or anything that would have created that intensity of light in that defined a shape. Ugh. Oh, that's creepy. Also, when pictures were taken, it did not show up on anyone's phones. See? Nothing shows up down there. I don't understand it. Anyway. Granted, this was before smartphones and large zooms, but what pictures were taken, the door of light anomaly did not show up. When I looked back from reviewing my phone, it was gone. Emboldened by this experience, despite the lack of physical evidence, we pressed on. On the other side of the road, I spotted a tree that was illuminated by blue light. Approximately 15 to 20 feet from the road stood a singular birch tree amidst the Georgia pines, illuminated and visible and casting the other trees into shadow without lighting anything else. Furthermore, there was no moon that night. It was a new moon. Calling attention to this, we immediately began to try and debunk what we were seeing, as somebody had suggested maybe the moon was just shining off of the bark. The underbrush was too thick to approach up the small embankment, also rife with poison ivy. Instead, we shone flashlights on and around the tree itself. When flashlights were introduced, light and shadow reached as expected, and oddly, there were no other birch trees in the area. Yeah, I just realized I don't ever remember seeing birch trees down there. Like at all. Huh. However, when the flashlights were off, the eerie blue glow returned. We were not able to figure out why it was that one tree, shorter than the canopy and in a place it should not have been visible in the darkness, seemed to be subtly illuminated by itself. Walking on to the last bit of the road we were familiar with, we approached the bend and had to make a decision as to whether or not we were going to explore. This was as far as any of us had ever been. It was hours into walking, and just as long a walk back. Debating, we were paused and evaluating our current experiences, the time, and what we wanted to do when everyone present heard a noise. Thinking at first it was an animal, we were out in the woods of rural Georgia after dark. The conversation quieted, but continued until we heard it again. It sounded like laughing, cackling to be precise. Suddenly, we were all discussing the sound in hushed tones. This was before coyotes had started to become quite so numerous in the area, but we all agreed it didn't sound like a coyote. Raccoons, owls, and deer were all ruled out, and suddenly we heard it a third time, much closer than it had been before. Ooh, I just got chills. I was present for this story, and I still get chills. Deciding that we were going to call it for the night, just in case we were wrong about it, and there was a wild animal getting closer, we started walking quickly back down the road to the car. The fourth time we heard it, it genuinely sounded like a human cackle, and we began to run, as it was even closer than it had been before. None of us being the most in shape, running was taxing, but seeing as we heard the laughter 2 or 3 more times, each time closer than before, agreed amongst 5 different people, we managed until we had not heard the sound again, having passed the first of the 7 bridges back down the road. Walking back to the car, startled, spooked, and out of breath, nothing else happened that evening, but it was not a night soon forgotten. Buh, Brent. I had forgotten a lot of those details. Oh, that laughter was horrible. It was that spine-tingling, just, you knew you were in danger, and it was laughter which made it terrifying danger. And I'd forgotten the birch tree. I had not forgotten the doorway. The doorway, I remember, stood out very clearly in my mind. But, I mean, hey, that road was crazy. Rome's nickname is the Enchanted Land, and I feel like some places more than others, it's really not hard to figure out why. Thank you for sending in your story, Brent. I look forward to any other stories you would like to submit. And if anybody else listening wants to submit, reminder that you can send your stories to ThatSpookyLifePodcast@gmail.com. But that's going to bring us to the end of our episode today and the 101 of CCC Road. I'm very much enjoying doing this podcast, and I love that you guys have so much feedback and seem to really be loving it alongside me. This is a journey for us, and I am having a blast so far walking alongside you guys in the spooky world. So I never know how to finish. I'm just going to say thank you for joining me, and until next week, just keep living that spooky life. Bye.